Hello and welcome to the chaos. It is a sewing vlog and it is the end of the month. So I am frantically trying to finish loads of projects before the end of the month.
It's perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Perfect jacket.
So my last video was me, the last video you saw was a dress, colour block dress, but the last video I made was the metallic sequin jacket, and I referred to another sequin jacket that I made 12 years ago, or 11 and a half, something. This is it, this gold one here with the beaded trim that I also made, and she is aging beautifully. I love this jacket so much. And it's got orange linings, orange silk for the lining. And it's orange and, well, autumn colours months. I'm not so sure about these months where I do different colour themes. They seem to stress me out. I thought it would help me organise which tweeds to get out each month. But it's just so disappointing when I have to put them all back. Anyway, the orange and navy tweed. Anytime I see a really distinct, bold plaid, I think of Vivienne Westwood's jackets, which are amazing, but I only bought a yard. So, of course, I had to use it in a less extravagant way because the pattern clash, the directionals take at least 2.5 times as much fabric. Anyway, so I started doing it with a small amount of beading, and then I sort of amped it right up and did way too much beading. To be fair, I have other jackets that have way more beading, and I mean, I've got to use up my aim is to use up my entire bead collection. So yeah, I've got to go a bit full on to do that. Anyway, I've already made 2 videos about this jacket. The first one was cutting it out and doing the basic beading, and now I'm then taking it off and starting the new beading. And the second one was finishing all the outer jacket, and now it is time to put in the silk lining. I have to put it in by hand rather than machine sewing it in because the outer jacket is actually finished, all the edges are finished. So normally with my jackets I make the outer jacket and do the lining, and then I sew them together around the neckline, and that puts them together. And this is the 12-year-old jacket, and I'm just showing you. It's aging really well. I went through my jackets and I was trying to find one that hasn't aged well so that I could, while I was putting in this other one by hand, I could also replace because when coats get old or jackets get old, you usually have to replace the silk lining. But I guess because I've got so many jackets, they don't wear out because, well, also they've got yokes in them, which makes them age much better. If you've got a coat that's just full silk lining or a jacket that's just full silk lining, they do not age as well as the ones with the yoke, just because that's where all the stress is, usually around the neckline. And I guess I put my sleeves in a better way than most people do, so there's no aging or splitting there either. So yeah, I'm not really sure what to do. I looked on the interwebs and I was trying to find a torn lining of a vintage jacket or a vintage coat, and not surprisingly, I guess, people don't want to put photos of their old torn jackets, the inside of their old torn jackets and coats on the interwebs. But yeah, it's a bit difficult because this one's got a yoke. So we are going to cheat a little bit. I've already this is editing me now, and I've already put the lining in this orange navy jacket. So I very, very carefully turned this heavily beaded jacket inside out. Don't turn a heavily beaded jacket inside out. But anyway, I'm just doing it to show you. This jacket here has the lining attached separately. So I can unpick, I can cut the threads that hold this lining in place, and all the structure of the outer jacket will stay in place because that was made entirely separately. So if I had to unpick this jacket, what I would do is just see this messy, very messy, hand sewing along here that I did in a rush. All of that is just on the lining. It's hooked into the outer jacket to make it, to attach it, but before I even made the lining, the entire outer jacket, the neckline of it was made. So they're two separate things. So to unpick this one in 10 years, if I have to unpick it, all I'd have to do is undo that and then undo these hand stitching that holds the silk to the rest of the jacket. So this one would be relatively simple to replace, but this one, if in 20 years I have to replace this, I'm going to have to undo the machine sewn stitches that hold the seam allowance of the lining in place, but then to undo the actual orange silk from this, I'll actually have to cut it out. Let's look at this one, because this is probably more like the jackets that you have that will have silk that needs to be replaced. So I'll get this one out, and because this is the way most jackets, vintage jackets, are made. So they have a whole silk lining, and the silk lining is machine sewn to the outer jacket at the neckline and then hand stitched down. So you can cut the hand stitches. That won't wreck the structure of the jacket, but you can see that the outer jacket and the lining were machine sewn together at the neckline. You can tell that because they meet at the machine stitches. It's not like with my other jacket. This one here, you can see that this is a picture of it before the lining went in, and the whole of the neckline is already finished. And then I just had to carefully pin back. I'll show you in detail further on in this video, but I just had to make the silk lining and carefully pin it in and hand stitch it in place. They're not machine sewn at the neckline. So whereas this one here, this is how most jackets are made. So what I have to do, it's fine to undo these hand stitches here. They're not structural. They're just holding the seam allowance back so it sits neatly. So I can cut that thread and unpick it, but I cannot cut that line of stitches there. So what I do is just get embroidery scissors and just cut this right at the seam line. What you need to make the pattern of all these pieces is you need all your silk and you need to know where the seam line is. So you can't cut the thread because that's holding the jacket together, but you can very carefully just go around and cut out the silk at the seam line. You need to know where the seam line is. So it'll take you a long time to do that. Just if it's getting too frustrating, walk away, do it over the course of a week or 2 weeks, just a little bit of tiny bit at a time. Some people use razors to get out the old silk, but I wouldn't do that as a first time. I'd use embroidery scissors because they're tiny and or thread snippers. They're tiny and you can just do one tiny bit at a time. And the point is you need to know where the seam line is on the edge of each piece. It doesn't matter if you can't get any seam allowance, you just need the seam line and you'll be able to draw a pattern. So the next thing is, once you've finally got all your silk out in one piece or in a couple of torn pieces, whatever, you need the whole thing. So this is what it would look like. This is one that I've made and it hasn't actually been sewn into a jacket yet. But if you cut the silk lining out of a jacket, it would basically look like this. So now what you have to do is, the first thing, you can cut all the seam allowances hand sewn down. So you need to take those, how you would make it, you have to do everything in reverse. So the last thing I did to this was I hand stitched the seam allowances back. So I'd have to undo all those threads to pull it apart, undo all of them. Once it's undone, then you have to undo each piece from each piece. So that way you can draft your whole pattern. So you carefully pick apart each of the seams. Again, this can take forever. You just making a new lining that's going to last another 20 or 30 years. So it's worth investing time in. So if it's too hard, you can carefully iron it with a very low heated iron. You don't want to burn the pieces. You need them at the correct size and the correct shape. Or if you think it's easier, cut them at the seam line. But personally, I think once it's at this point, then the easiest way to get it apart is to just unpick each seam carefully. And once you've got each piece in separated, so obviously the first thing you do is you take out the sleeves, and then, so once you've got all the pieces, a lot of the things like the curves of the neckline and the curves of the underarm, they had to clip those curves and cut down the seam allowance to get it into the right shape. But you still have the seam line. So you use the seam line to make your patterns for each piece. This is a pattern that I traced from the Berta 6123, that dolman sleeve jacket. In the original, it has facing in the front. So the tweed sort of goes a little bit on the inside, and they have no lining. So I had to draft my own lining, and I sort of changed it so that the front lining piece is also the tweed. So what I did was I took the original piece and I sort of cut it down so it's now ends at the center front. And then what I did was I used that same piece to draft out my next bits. So the brown bit there is the center front for the lining, and it's made of tweed, and the rest of the lining is going to be silk. So what I need to do is decide where I want those two to meet. So the line with the needle on it, that is where the two of them are going to meet once they're sewn together. But obviously you need to add seam allowance on each side, so that the silk seam allowance will make the silk piece longer, and the tweed seam allowance will make the tweed piece longer. But once I sew them together, they will meet at that line with the needle on it. So that's how you draft a pattern in. Sorry if that sounds oversimplified, but it kind of confuses me. So yeah, I just saying it simply is the easiest way to get things right. So iron all the pieces. If the seam allowance remaining is confusing you, cut it all down to just this where the seam lines are. If you've worn a jacket for a decade or 2 decades and the machine holes of the machine sewn lines are really distinct, so just carefully use your scissors and cut each piece on the seam line. It will be way less confusing. And then trace out all the pieces, like make sure they're well ironed, trace out all the pieces, and then go around and add your seam allowance back to every single piece, and then make a mock-up, not out of silk, don't wreck your silk yet, make a mock-up out of just some shiny polyester fabric that you have so that it's easy to slip on, and make the whole thing, not just half, because you have to try it on to see whether the sleeves fit on your arms comfortably. If that has worked, and when you're trying it on, obviously you're trying it on with the outer side towards your skin, because the seam allowances are hidden. So when you try it on, they'll be obvious. So try it on. If that fits perfectly, then the next step is you have to pin it into your old coat or your old jacket just to see whether you've got the neckline right. So yeah, just pin it in this next bit of the video. You'll see how I pin mine in. And yeah, if it's right and everything's cool and you don't have to change anything, now you can make it out of silk and then hand stitch that in place. So here we are back at the original timeline of the video. I have made the silk for this orange and navy jacket, and now it is time to put it in. When I made this silk, instead of sewing it in, I put machine lines where the seam lines are going to be. So I just fold back the seam allowance on the magenta silk and I pin it into place, and then I just hand stitched it in. Because this is a heavily beaded jacket and there's bits of the neckline where I still haven't done, I had to just do the back half. So the back half to the point where the shoulders are, I hand stitched that in. Now this front half here, I have to finish doing the beading, and here we go. I finished adding like 12, 15 beads on this side. And then once I'd done that, I was able to stitch the front piece, so the tweed piece, into place at the neckline, and then finish the silk lining. And then once that was done, I had to hand stitch the linings bits together, the silk and the tweed. And then once that was done, I just did the cuff on this side. I thought I'd just finish the whole of the right side first and then go on to the left side. So I did the same thing. I had to finish the beading on the front left corner there. You can see there's those 4 taller beads and some blue beads as well. So all up, there's a dozen or so beads. And then I hand stitched the tweed back at the neckline, and now I'm pinning the silk and stitching these two together. So that, again, that's just hand stitching. The next step is to pin up there, just turn up the raw seams at the bottom and stitch that into place. And then, once again, just hand stitching it into place. It's quite easy to do, but it does take a little bit of time. When I'm hand stitching, I tend to sort of stitch right up to the pin, or sometimes a little over it, then take it out, then stitch up to the next one, then take that out. So everything remains in place until you've sewn it. And there we go. As you can see, I didn't finish this last cuff, because when you're hand stitching, when you're working with a jacket that is this heavily beaded, it's really heavy. Like with a normal jacket or a coat, you can sort of hold it in the precise way that you have to hold it to hand stitch the silk in, and it's okay, it's not too heavy. But because this was beaded, and I did a lot at once to try and get everything filmed, by the last cuff I was like, the tension between my shoulders and my neck, I was like, oh no, I've done too much work. So I just got up and stood up and walked around and filmed for a bit. And then you'll see that I finished the actual cuff later. But so this jacket is done now, and it's beautiful. It's so unusual. It's very different from what I normally do. So now I'm thinking about different color combinations, because normally I just use like monochrome, one color, or a range of very similar colors. So this has been interesting. So I'm sort of rethinking what I'll do for some of my jackets, but I'm very happy with the way that this one turned out. The more you look at it, the more you see. So some of them are almost red, some of the orange ones, and I really love it. So that is this one finally made, and as I said, there's the previous 2 videos where you can see how it got to be where it is. But now that this one is done, I've got lots of other things to finish, hopefully before the end of this month. Because, so far this month I've made 3, I've still got this dress here that hasn't been finished. But I have 4 dresses now, I think, that I've finished this month. And I still have the vintage one for the pleating video. Most of that video and most of that dress is done, just need a little bit. Then I may finish the metallic sequin jacket, and this one here, completely finished it, including the beading and stitching the lining up. So now I've got these UFOs, or these unfinished jackets. I think I will tackle them. Before I did that though, oh my God, I'm so chaotic at the moment. I decided to put away the brown tweeds, but then I couldn't. I had them in my hot little hand, and I decided the knit, I was going to cut this pattern up into sections. If you saw my most recent fabric haul, you'll know that I was looking at a few new patterns on the simplicity.com website, and there's this birder one, and it's got sort of a slash across the chest area, and also the sleeves in one of the 2 views has sleeve extensions, like big cuffs sort of thing. So I thought with this one, this Berta 6123, I could do that, and that way I can use, because with these knits I've just got 1 yard of fabric, just 1 yard exactly. So technically I could fit the jacket surface area wise, but it's been a struggle. So yeah, I managed to cut out the caramel one, and then I got out the other knit as well, and I've done the same thing. So the front piece I've been able to cut as the torso out as one, but the back piece, it's in two bits, and then the sleeves are sort of at the elbow, they're two different bits. And then yeah, I also didn't have the heart to put away this piece because I think if I put ivory coloured glass pearls on this one, it would just in the sections where there's cream and white sort of strips of ribbon woven into the tweed, I just think it will be absolutely gorgeous. So I cut out those pieces, and I didn't have to cut them into bits. There's just one massive bit for the back and one for the front left, one for the front right. But I did need to use some brown fabric for the front of the tweed section for the lining. So yeah, I'm not sure I like that solid brown though. I might get a different Oscar de la Renta tweed I have and do that. But this is a tiny little bit of the fabric of this amazing Chanel style tweed. And I pulled it apart just to show you all the different things in it. I love the teal and that sort of aqua shiny one. But yeah, I don't know. Now I'm sort of second guessing. I really do think it would look gorgeous with pearls, but maybe some other smaller beads as well. Anyway, so now I've got all these ones that are so close to finishing. I just have to put the linings in, get the linings out from where so I've just been making them in sort of every now and then. I'll have an hour or two and I'll just sew together another silk lining. And yeah, now that I've got 10 of them, I'm like, okay, it's time to just batch sew all the linings in. So here you can see I use the brown silk, the remains of the brown silk, to make the lining for this brown and black one. And then that's the Oscar de la Renta one at the front there. And there's a Chanel one. Oh, they're so beautiful. Anyway, so I think I've done a lot of the linings, not all of them. So maybe I'll go and finish the last few linings, and then, yeah, I'll be back. Oopsie, I kind of got a little bit sort of distracted. But on the bright side, don't they look pretty? Don't they look so pretty? I found a couple more jackets from... So I was trying to finish 5 jackets per month, and it's just ridiculous. There's 12 here that I haven't finished. So yeah, I've sort of dropped the ball for the last few months. I think it was back in June I did a commaring my unfinished jackets, and that's when I sorted out and allotted to finish different ones in different months. But I mean, we all juggle work and hobbies. I do sometimes question why I decided to make 3 videos a week, but I'm getting lots of things. I wanted to replenish my wardrobe this year because during the pandemic, I'd got down to just my jackets as well as activewear. So I was like, okay, time to beef up the wardrobe, make lots of shirts, skirts and dresses. So, I mean, I've been doing that. These are 2 more dresses that I just finished. I cut them out a few months ago, but I didn't end up sewing them together until quite recently. And yeah, this one here is a keyhole dress. So if you saw the layer cake dress from last month, it's basically a top, but I turned it into the bodice for a dress. And I hadn't done a version with the long sleeves, so this is it just from the side. And yeah, I love it. It's sort of calf length, just under the knee. So it's designed to be worn with cowboy boots. And I've got these gorgeous Chanel cowboy boots from the Dallas collection several years ago. And yeah, they just look perfect together. They're sort of that tan color. So that's that one. And the other one is the bodice, this vintage looking one, the bodice is Butterick 6677, the bodice I always use. And I just made it a scoop neck. I just drew that line myself. And because I want it to sort of be something I can wear like a jumper dress over a shirt. And it also looks good when the necklace sort of sits above the neckline of the dress, I think. Anyway, so the next thing you'll see is a video of me making that knit up into a jacket, Burda 6123. And then, yeah, I think I'll try and get all these jackets here done by the end of the month, but you probably won't see that sewing vlog of that until the start of next month. But hopefully I'll get them all in this month, and that way I can show them in the collections video for this month. And yeah, I spent so much of my sewing time this month on that orange and navy one. Totally worth it. I think it was a really good investment. It's very different to what I normally make. And I wasn't sure about using those rose ones. They're sort of dark teal with gold flecks on them, and the other sort of hexagon shaped ones. But because they've got big surface area and they're quite lightweight, like they're made out of plastic, not glass or something like some of the smaller ones are, it actually, you get a lot of bang for your buck when you use, all different types of beads together. Anyway, I am going to go sew those infernal linings into those infernal jackets so I can then do all the fun bit, which is the beading for me. So I hope you enjoyed watching as I finally finished the navy and orange jacket with that gorgeous magenta silk for the lining and hand stitched that in. Hope it was useful if you have any jacket linings you need replaced. And I finished these 2 pink dresses. They're so cute. I can't wait to wear a green shirt under that pink vintage look one. So yeah, the next video you'll see will be the knit one with, I'll talk all about block interfacing, which is, it sort of sounds trickier than it is. And once you stabilize a knit or, some other flighty fabric that doesn't want to do what it's supposed to do, you can just make jackets out of basically anything, which is completely awesome. Okay, thanks again for watching and happy sewing. Gosh, I've got a lot of jackets to finish.